Total War Warhammer 2 is just around the corner, I think, and with it we will be receiving a pre-order race for those who pre-ordered. It'll probably be available on week 1, just the same thing as it was for Warriors of Chaos and for Norska, but we don't really know what race that is. There is a camp of people that believe that now that the Ogre Kingdoms have come as a mercenary in the Silent and the Fury DLC, that means that they will not be coming as a full-fledged roster in Game 3 until later, or they'll have like a Bretonia-esque reduced roster. And it means that the Chaos Dwarfs will be the pre-order race. The other camp just thinks that, okay, great. The Ogre Kingdoms have come in as the mercenaries. That means that this is a preamble to them coming as the full-fledged race in the pre-order, and then the Chaos Dwarfs hopefully at a different time. And when I say hopefully, they probably will, right? I mean, they've had a book and they've said all of the races that had books in Warhammer Fantasy will be receiving their own full race treatment in Total War Warhammer. So that's the subject of this video today. Chaos Dwarfs versus Ogre Kingdoms. Who will be that pre-order bonus, and where will they be on the map, so on and so forth. So in my typical fashion of upfronting the knowledge to you that is within this video, rather than having you sit through the whole thing for me to just say exactly what I'm about to, my opinion is that the Ogre Kingdoms will be the pre-order race. And I know a number of other people agree with me on this matter, and we're going to go through today why I think that the Ogre Kingdoms make the most sense for the pre-order race. And essentially it comes down to the fact that it's easier to replace the Chaos Dwarfs on the proposed map, which we'll go into, that'll be a part of this video too, proposed map for Game 3, than it would be to replace the Ogre Kingdoms. If you look here at the Darklands, this little portion, and we're doing this kind of low tech so I can like highlight things with the cursor, this portion is not all Chaos Dwarfs. There's really only 5 or 6 pinnacle locations of the Chaos Dwarfs within the Darklands, whereas the Ogre Kingdom's Mountains of Morn is almost entirely filled with Ogre Kingdom tribes. It's a little bit more difficult and centrally located to replace this faction on the map. And if we compare this to Total War Warhammer 2, which again we'll do in a little bit, the Tomb Kings were far easier to replace because they really just inhabited this portion of the Total War Warhammer 2 map. You had all this over here and over here to take advantage of in the meantime. And they were easily replaced with vampire counts because it's just another undead faction. You swap them from vampire counts to Tomb Kings. Yes, of course, it's a different faction in there, but for the most part, they're going to be the same type of opposition you would face from the other factions around there. So in this video, we're going to be breaking this down. We're going to go through my proposed map of Game 3, and I'm going to say it's going to really kind of help substantiate my claim as to why the Ogre Kingdoms make a better pre-order race in the dark dwarves than the Chaos Dwarfs. And then we're going to go into the Chaos Dwarf presence on the map, then the Ogre Kingdom presence on the map, and then go into finally some evidence that already exists in the Ogre mercenaries that we've been granted in the game that kind of hints towards, okay, this could definitely mean that the Ogres are coming. Some models and some descriptions. When I say models, I mean animations, and just kind of talk about some things there. But that's the straight and narrow of this. If that's all you wanted to know as far as my opinion on what the pre-order race is, you're good to go. You can shut the video down if you so wish. And you've got chapters in the timeline if you just want to jump to the points in which I talk about the things I just mentioned. But as always, guys, if you're enjoying this content, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun action. But if you have not yet pre-ordered Total War Warhammer 3, you can do so using the link to my Nexus Store in the description. They will give you a key, a Steam key, directly from the developer, and you'll also get that pre-order discount, and it is a great way to support the channel. But let us get started here on the pre-order bonus, Chaos Dwarfs versus Ogre Kingdoms. So again, what we're going to start off is kind of outlining the map for Total War Warhammer 3. And if we press this button, and I can go all sorts of places. I think that the map, the furthest west the map is probably going to go is the lands of Kislev. And obviously that makes sense. We know that they're coming into the game. This is the faction we know is going to be there, along with Cathay, and then along with the 4 demon monogod factions, right? Each one allied to one of the major ruinous powers. But when we look at this land, it has a nice little natural cutoff here before we get to the World's Edge Mountains, and then the Darklands, then the Mountains of Morn, and Grand Cathay. I think that we could probably see that that's pretty much what we'll be seeing as far as the mainland. I think the Dragon Isles will also be included on probably, Warhammer 2 has got its campaign name in Vortex campaign, right? And then we get the Mortal Empires, which is the combined map. I've always speculated that the combined map for Game 3 will be Immortal Empires, and I'm not too sure what the Game 3's unique campaign will be, but that unique campaign will probably include the Dragon Isles, I would assume so. And we already have had Isles over here and over here as well included into the Mortal Empires campaign maps. So I could see them including some sort of like weird hodgepodge version of these lower regions of the map without making it saying, hey, we've included the entire portion of Ind and Koresh in the map. This doesn't mean they're going to be coming, but a portion of it where it's like, hey, we're just going to cut off this top portion, and right over here we'll have some goblin presence because there's forest goblins in the northern hinterlands of Koresh, or maybe that's where they'll have some lizardmen start, whatever it is. If they wanted to put the actual races of Ind or Koresh, I would be quite all right with that. And same thing here with Ind. I think they could probably put a portion of this in just to make the map go further south on the base campaign to include stuff like Lamia over here, Nagashazar, which would be like right around there, give or take. Just some stuff to really kind of filter into the map from the lower portions here that don't make as much sense geographical to slap in if you know the whole geography of the map, but still I think they've already done that. They've already shoehorned them in with the Mortal Empires map, so it makes some sense to do that with the Immortal Empires. So that's kind of my cutout here from this region all the way down. Probably go down here into the south, cut across the Sea of the Dead, probably make the Sea of the Dead a whole region and cut directly across, come up before Napone, and then come back over here into the eastern portion of Cathay and cut you off at the top here with the Eastern Steppes and Great Bastion. And we're going to look at some other stuff from the cinematic to kind of help substantiate this claim too. So we have this map too that came out from Warhammer Community, and this represents the old world, the new supplement that's going out with Warhammer Fantasy to kind of bring us back to the time of 3 emperors, 5 emperors, 17 emperors, the time of many emperors from all the many lands. And I think that this is a really good cutout for what we could expect from Kislev, right? We have Erengrad far to the west over here, and I think this is perfect. It could just be right here. Go right down this dotted line, jump down across, and then, hey, that's your western edge of the map, and the rest is shrouded, just like we have with a lot of portions of the eastern side of the Total War Warhammer 2 Vortex map. Just do it kind of like that. And we even get this little presence of the Chaos Dwarfs right here. We get the Hobgoblin Khans, and we have some potential starting locations for Kislev across the map. So I think that this is a telling map in some way, shape, or form as to how Kislev will be implemented into Game 3, because we've already seen that they've changed the lore of Kislev in Game 3, right? There's less of a emphasis on the separate cultural groups of Kislev and more of an emphasis on this kind of homogenized group of just saying, hey, these are all Kislevites. We don't distinguish whether or not they're Gospodars or Ungals and so on and so forth. So I think the kind of new, quote unquote, lore of Kislev is going to be the blueprint for how we will get them in Game 3, and thus that will then transfer over to the Old World supplement coming out from Games Workshop. Because remember, they make all the calls. Creative Assembly makes the game, but they have to constantly get it checked with Games Workshop. They're in that office a lot going, okay, yeah, you can do that. Okay, you cannot do that, so on and so forth. Moving here into the cinematic, we get the Creative Assembly Total War style map. And we get Grand Cathay right here. We get the Warpstone Desert over here. We get the path to the east. And there, I think, yeah, there's another shot of this where this has the land of the giants is kind of hidden by his hand right here because he moves these aside and you can then see more. But you also see the Great Bastion. Now, this could also be a hint to the starting location, say, of Katarina over here in the path to the east with a Khorne presence north of the Great Bastion. And this actually would put this right around the Imperial City for the Celestial Dragon Emperor. So these are some potential kind of fleshing out of the map, as it were. And if we jump over one more picture, we see a pretty good map. And this came out in, I think it's White Dwarf number 300, 306, something around there. And this is probably one of the better maps of the Warhammer world that isn't nondescript. Usually it's just hey, here's these general blanket territories. They kind of look like our map, right? Well, okay. Like this actually has a very good distinction of things. And if you look right here, I kind of look at this slice. This is the same portion of the map in the previous image, just oriented north-south. The previous image has it oriented east-west. With the path of the east is where we had the Katarina model. We had Weijin is probably where we had that little jade dragon model. And then north of the Great Bastion, right here by Nangao, we probably had that little, what's it called? Bloodletter model. So this gives us, again, a pretty good representation, right? I don't think that Katarina would start over here in Path of the East. And I don't think also that we would have bloodletters over here, but Weijin, I think, is a very good, substantial starting point for the Celestial Dragon Emperor, seat of the Dragon Throne. But again, Warpstone Desert is right here. The Ancient Dragonlands is also mentioned on that map before he moves his hands. So this is just me kind of painting the map here for you guys to give you an understanding of where I think things are going to be placed for Game 3, right? This is the map I kind of have in mind. You have that Northern Wastes, swings down over here, comes down over into Liberus, comes across over into the Sea of Dead, the Bitter Sea. Things have been changed so many times across the many years of Warhammer and its editions. Over across here to the hinterlands of Koreshan, and then up this East Coast Cathay to the Great Bastion. I think it'll be probably a map somewhat similar to that. But let's jump into a little bit now about the Chaos Dwarf presence on this map, because you can already see from here that presence is pretty localized and minimal. I mean, even Ian Roxborough, the Total War Warhammer 3 creative director, said that the standalone map is roughly twice the size of Warhammer 2's Eye the Vortex map. And it needs to be, as this is part of the Warhammer world that gives way to the realms of chaos, which takes up a significant area in their own right. So we're probably talking a lot about the actual mortal realm, right? When we talk about the western portion, the Darklands, Cathay, the Mountains of Morn. But I would imagine too, we're going to be expanding into the realms of chaos in an actual map presence and not just simply little instanced locations that we visit as part of a quest. And before I do that, before we actually look at a map for the Chaos Dwarfs, I just want to use this map one more time to exemplify the Tomb Kings at the very beginning of Total War Warhammer 2. This is the map that we had prior to, or right about at the exact time of launch. Remember at the very initial one, we just saw ruins because they announced Skaven later in the game. But you can see the Land of the Dead, and you can see the coast of Araby and the Land of Dervishes, and you can see all these lands that have placeholder factions in them, right? These, of course, changed when Tomb Kings came out. The Neckarch Brotherhood, the Strigos Empire, those two things were either removed from the respective campaign of the Vortex or Mortal Empires, or just reduced to just a single presence in a single location. And I think that made a lot of sense, right? Especially when you're taking a look at Vampire Counts versus Tomb Kings. Yes, of course, like I said, different rosters, but makes sense because if I'm going to be playing as any of the Lizardmen or as Clan Moors, anything like that, it's the same style of opposition I'd be fighting. Even these locations over here, right? Land of Assassins, this kind of got truncated down multiple times, right? This location over here got truncated down too as well, because then we got the presence of Reponse in there and Arkan the Black in here. Land of the Dervishes changed with Snikch. So all this stuff became very dynamic as those races came out. And I feel like thematically, the placement of these three Bretonnian factions and these two Vampire Coast factions made some sense. Maybe they're not the Vampire Coast factions as much, but the Bretonnian ones definitely did. Hey, these are leftovers from the Great Crusade, so on and so forth. So I could appreciate their stance there and keeping them there. Right? Sudenburg itself, too, was like a penal colony. So all that does make sense. And when we look at this map right here, we're going to take a look at the presence of the Chaos Dwarfs. And we can see them in Zarnagrand, the Gates of Zar, the Tower of Gorgoth, the Demon's Stump, the Black Fortress, and then lastly, Uzalak. Now, that one is mentioned, this northern one is mentioned in that specific map we took a look at from Warhammer Community. So I think that this is going to be one that we'll definitely probably see, and this definitely has to be there, right? The Tower of Zarnagrand is like the capital of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. So if we're looking at all this, one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. That's a pretty easy amount of locations to just simply place placeholders in. It makes a lot of sense for greenskins to inhabit anything across these mountain ranges. It makes a lot of sense for the Skaven to inhabit anything over down here, especially next to Crookback Mountain or Mount Greyhag. I mean, there's so many you could even put Chaos Dwarfs, or I'm sorry, not you could even put vampire counts in there and say, hey, they moved north of the Fortress of Vorag, and we get another kind of Neckarch Brotherhood that goes, I'm sorry, not Neckarch Brotherhood, it would be Strigos Empire that would be over there. Because Vorag tried to create this second Strigos Empire, so maybe he's got a huge chunk of this land, just like we saw in Warhammer 2's map, where rather than having a bunch of little factions in those locations, they made just one larger independent faction. Even further too, you could even have a minor presence of dwarfs in one of these locations too, to replicate that. Clan Helheim, after the fall of the Ekron mine, they go back to Carrick 8 Peaks, but then some of them then move over into the Mountains of Morn, pursuing other riches. So it could make sense to have them have a presence over here, over this location or here, just to kind of like, oh, okay, there's just dwarfs in here, but soon to be chaos dwarfs in these locations. So again, you've only got 6 total locations on the map. Maybe it's one region, maybe it's one larger province here and there. Like especially the Tsar Nagran, I imagine, is one, if not 2 larger provinces. But I think some of these smaller ones would be a smaller region or 1 or 2 region settlement. So just to kind of keep that in mind. But again, Chaos Dwarf presence, very small, easy to replace on the map with some placeholders. Let's now talk about the Ogre Kingdoms and their presence on my proposed map. And we're going to start right here with the Mountains of Morn. Like, look at this. This is more the western edge of the Mountains of Morn, but this is the ancient giant lands towards the central portion of it, which we've already seen on the map. And you can see each one of these little red triangles represents an Ogre Kingdom tribe somewhere on this map. And this gives us so many options for Creative Assembly to slap them everywhere on this portion of the Mountains of Morn. Obviously, we have Grease's Goldtooth's major tribe right here, but the rest of them, they're just all over the place. And they'd have a pretty minor presence too on the western World's Edge, to the west of this in the World's Edge Mountains, but that's maybe like 1, if not maybe 2 tribes. There wouldn't be as large of a presence as there would in the Mountains of Morn. And there's already just so much. So replacing these guys is difficult, especially because the models are already in the game now. We've already seen the presence of them in at least 2 different unit variations. Well, I'm sorry, 3 unit variations in total. And I think when you look at this portion of the map, again, you see how these ancient giant lands and how the Mountains of Morn really play into a larger portion of this map. The Great Maw is really important, of course, to the Ogre lore. You have the exit wound of the Great Maw over here in the Maelstrom, which I don't think is actually on this map. Yeah, it's like over here, right? The Maelstrom is the exit wound of the Great Maw as it ripped through the Warhammer world. So I think that the Ogre Kingdoms are going to be playing a pretty big role as far as their presence as a bridge point between Grand Cathay and the Darklands. I think that the Ogre Kingdoms are going to have a lot of options for diplomacy with Grand Cathay because they play a very big role in the lore of Grand Cathay, as well as playing a role over here to the west, becoming a possible ally for any number of factions that could be starting in the Darklands. Pigbarter would be a human location, so this could have a potential for a Kislev starting location or just a generic Empire faction. We don't really know, of course. It might be a possible place for a minor faction or a place for Dogs of War to start. And that's another thing too, right? Dogs of War can be really shoehorned into this now that we have a true mercenary system in Game 2 and soon to hopefully be in Game 3. So I think that, again, trying to replace this whole section of the map with a bunch of weird random generic stuff that is probably going to be Greenskin, Skaven, maybe even some quote-unquote Norskin, because these guys are not Norskin, right? They're Kurgan and Hung. Units wouldn't make a lot of sense. These way easier to just replace in a post-launch campaign pack. And if you think about it too, the Tomb King's campaign pack was amazing. I honestly feel that yeah, the Vampire Coast was cool because it was its own custom thing, and it came out and no one expected it, and boom, it was sweet. I even said for the longest time we'll never get Vampire Coast, but it was great to get. But still, the Tomb Kings campaign to this day, it hasn't gotten a huge facelift or anything like that, like a lot of the Game 2 factions needed, and it came out very strong, and it's still a really solid campaign. And I think that that bodes very well for the Chaos Dwarfs to possibly bolster existing dwarf mechanics and create a whole slew of their own mechanics in the shape of their own campaign pack, their own campaign DLC. Now, I hope that this doesn't mean that Ogre Kingdoms are going to be watered down as a result of a pre-order race, because the Norskins and the Warriors of Chaos, both pre-order races, are kind of a little lackluster, and they really do need their facelift that should hopefully be coming with Game 3, because Game 3 is going to imbue them with demon units and the ruinous powers, as it were. So I'm very curious to see how the Ogre Kingdoms are implemented, if they will have a reduced roster, but my gut tells me that that was not a joke on gut plates and stuff like that. Good pun on my part, but I still think that the Ogre Kingdoms are going to have a very strong presence coming into Game 3 as that pre-order race. Well, let's take a look at some stuff in the actual game to take a look at some of those models and animations I was talking about, as well as those descriptions. Before we talk about the actual units, I do want to talk about when the ogres arrive and when they leave in the new DLC. It gives us two little kind of preview images, and when they arrive, it shows Nobblers and an ogre tyrant. And again, it's more of a bit of a window into possible other units from the Ogre Kingdoms army list. And then when they leave, you get to see a Rhinoxen, a Slave Giant. So again, more things from possible Ogre faction. And this could just be ripped directly from the Ogre art in some of the dilemmas and decisions that you might encounter with the Ogre Kingdoms faction. So just wanted to show these off real quick before we jump into the actual units in game. So to get us started here, let's take a look at these normal ogres with dual weapons. And they have this description right here that says their spiked metal gauntlets can shred foes to ribbons, which means less chewing later. This is probably a reference to the Iron Fists, which is a not a unit, a piece of equipment you could give them from 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, and it reads like this. Ogres of 10 cover their offhand with a spiked metal gauntlet, a habit which originated from the traditional sport of pit fighting. This gauntlet can be used to bat aside even the strongest attacks. An Iron Fist works in exactly the same way as a shield. An ogre using an Iron Fist benefits from a bonus to its armor save and may be eligible to make a parry save as described in the Warhammer rulebook. In addition, Iron Fists have been specifically developed to allow the ogre as much freedom as possible in a fight. As such, an ogre using an Iron Fist benefits from all the rules for shields, even if he is mounted. So we get that presence of the Ogre Iron Fist, the shield, which they do not have. So I think that that, again, talks about a unit variation of ogres. We've got just the normal ones, we've got the dual weapon ones, and we'll probably get an Iron Fist variation that probably has a bronze or silver shield attached to them, giving them some ability to defend against small missile fire. Now, our last thing to talk about here is the Mournfang Cavalry. Now, I'm going to unpause this, and you'll see why they're holding their arms up like this, because I have them in range of archers to be shot at. And they're not trying to, oh, the sun's in my eyes. They're trying to defend themselves from arrows. This is obviously an animation that lacks a shield. And in the 8th edition army book, when you brought these guys into the tabletop, you had the option to give them heavy armor and to give them iron fists and or great weapons. So I could see there being a different variation of Mournfang Cavalry that has a heavy armor option that is maybe more of a perpetual combat variant with iron fists, or a great weapon variant that is meant, of course, to threaten a little bit heavier into AP anti-large. Let's go ahead and unpause this, and you'll see they just kind of hold their arms up here as if they have got a shield. And the Iron Fist is not an actual shield. It's a big, huge metal gauntlet, kind of like the one that the generic new Doom Bowl gets. So, and of course it has a little more substantial size to it than just a normal gauntlet. It is a little bit bigger, and it can obviously kind of protect you, but it's not like a full-fledged shield. it's something that would, of course, kind of just be held up in the same fashion that they're doing right now. They're holding it over their head. Their gut plate's probably going to absorb the rest of it, or just the actual heavy armor. God, they're really getting a lot of blood going on. They're just covered in ketchup right now. But I just wanted to talk about these two little things here because I think that they are pretty substantial into showing different options and flavors of Ogre Kingdoms. And again, helping to substantiate that claim that I very much think that the ogres, let's put that in cinematic mode to watch them get peppered. You know what? Let's do this. So I think it just is, again, just a different way to kind of take a look at this rather than saying, hey, it makes sense. Let's see them as the pre-order bonus. I definitely think that we'll probably see them as the pre-order bonus because of just this animation stuff alone. But really taking a look at the map and where their presence is on the map is really huge. And again, to make the claim one more time, like I have like 15 times in this video, is that the Chaos Dwarf presence is just so easily replaced by comparison to the Ogre Kingdoms. So we'll still have to wait and see. I'm hoping now that we've seen the Ogre Kingdoms in the game, I would hope that Creative Assembly would say, okay, well now here's the pre-order bonus. Now you get to know, and maybe that will actually add them into Game 2 as a further expansion of that kind of mercenary mechanic that's in the game right now. Like, hey, okay, if you don't want to pre-order Game 3, then you'll just have the Ogre Mercenaries as is. But if you do pre-order Game 3, then you'll get access to more Ogre Mercenaries in Game 2. And honestly, I think that that's a really nice way to bring them into Game 2 without worrying about shoehorning them into the map some way, shape, or form, which is also not that hard, right? But again, I think that there's plenty of places that you could slap them into the Ogre Mercenaries tab and have it work pretty damn well. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Go ahead and let me know in the comment section below what your stance is. Do you think it's going to be Ogre Kingdoms? Do you think it's going to be Chaos Dwarfs? Maybe you say, hey, I'm on point with your one claim on this, but I think it should be this instead. Whatever it is, I'm always open to it, guys. But as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one, and take care.